right, good. Is it morning or afternoon? It's still the morning. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Hostex Bidfood Industry Hub. Thank you so much for joining us. Today we are going to be talking all things coffee, and I'm delighted to introduce my guests for this morning's panel discussion. On my left is Mr. Winston Thomas. He is a 3-time South African barista champion. He's also a business owner of Cedar Coffee Roastery down in Cape Town. Welcome, Winston.
Morning. Yeah, thanks for having me.
We're very lucky to have Winston with us. And of course, Mr. St. John Wicks, who has a long history in coffee, started as a barista in the Midlands and has now worked his way up through the industry corporate ladder to become one of the leading men at a top global coffee machine brand called Lamazoko, which I'm sure you've heard of. So St. John works for Lamazoko, and he's also the vice president of the Specialty Coffee Association. Welcome, St. John.
Thank you so much for having me, Ian. Really appreciate it.
All right, it's a pleasure. Just put your microphone a little closer to your mouth.
Little
All right,
closer.
so we're talking about coffee, we're talking about specialty coffee, and we're talking about how does it drive loyalty in hospitality. So I think where we should probably start here, gents, is this misnomer of a term called specialty coffee and what it actually means, just for the folks out there who maybe aren't as au fait with coffee as we are. Maybe, Winston, you can kick it off and explain the first part of what we believe specialty coffee to be.
Yeah, so theoretically on paper, all green coffee, which is unroasted coffee beans, is graded 0 to 100 professionally by individuals known as Q graders. And coffees that score about 80 to 82 and higher is referred to as specialty coffee. And that's because of the quality of the raw product, what it tastes like in the cup, and the limited amount of defects in that raw product. And so on paper, specialty coffee is any coffee bean green that scores 80 to 82 and higher on that global scale. Usually tastes a lot better as a coffee and usually goes for a slightly higher price as well because of that quality.
Absolutely. So the first part of specialty coffee is how it's scored as a raw product. St. John, the second part of specialty coffee is a little bit more complicated. Do you want to give the folks out there some insight into the what, where, who, why, and when?
Sure. I think the term specialty coffee is something that is a bit of it exists in a little bit of a gray area, in a similar way in which the flat white almost exists in a bit of a gray area. Everybody's got a different idea of what specialty coffee is. I've been into cafes across the country and across the world, and if you're able to pour latte art, that's considered specialty coffee. So I think the work that you're doing at the Coffee Mag and through platforms like this to promote specialty coffee, but also to definitively answer the question of what specialty coffee is hugely important to creating and setting an industry standard.
So I think, folks, what's really important here is that if we look at the majority of the market in South Africa, it's not specialty coffee.
Sure.
It's just below the specialty grade. But I think what we need to focus on here is how do operators or people here at Hostex who want to add coffee to their offering, their hospitality offering, probably are going to focus on the second part of that definition. So that's barista skills, it's equipment, it's definitely education, I would say, Winston.
Yeah.
Do you want to, if we look at the consumers in the market today, like there's definitely within the global village, we can see on Instagram all these beautiful cafes in New York and Australia and London and all of those kind of things. And maybe we don't have the purchasing power to buy that 90 plus coffee, but we certainly have everything else. Do you want to expand a little bit on those elements?
Yeah, it's important. I think just when we talk about training, I think, like St. John said, in some cafes, when you see beautiful latte art on the cup, you make the assumption that it's specialty coffee. But the problem with latte art, which is what most baristas focus on, is that the experience is quite fleeting because you get served a good cup of coffee that looks amazing. You take the photo, you post it online, but then you have a sip of the coffee and the espresso hasn't been extracted in the right way because the barista doesn't understand. They don't drink espresso. Like the amount of baristas I've come across that don't drink coffee is actually very surprising. And so like the core of the training isn't just how to pour nice latte art, it's understanding how to set your grinder to give you the good and balanced espresso that's going to work well with that milk. Because as much as the latte art looks amazing and someone posts a picture online, if you have 2 sips of that coffee and you don't like it, you're not going to come back to that cafe. Because the reality is a cup of coffee doesn't cost 20, 25 rand anymore. It's 40, 45, 50, sometimes 55 rand if you're taking an alternative milk. The customer's not going to want to come back and spend that money on a cup that looks nice but doesn't taste nice at the end of the day. And so I think when we're talking about specialty coffee and the core of quality for hospitality, the training part and the barista really understanding is very important. Yeah.
St. John, I think it's a great point, Winston, but just to add on to that, so you sell Lamazoko espresso machines, which need a barista to operate.
Yes.
Winston sells Eversys machines, which are fully automatic. You just have to push a button machines. The focus, though, never leaves the barista, does it?
No. No, and I think that's really important that we keep the human element behind specialty coffee. Specialty coffee doesn't exist without human intervention.
Yeah.
You know, at the farm level, there's still a human who's picking that a cherry from the tree. There's still a human that's processing that bean. There's still a human that is bringing that coffee into the country and distributing that coffee, roasting that coffee. And whether you're using a super automatic machine like the Eversys or a traditional espresso machine like a Lamazoko, there's still a human hand that is pressing the button or that is tamping the coffee. And whether it's an Eversys or whether it's a Lamazoko, there is still a barista and hopefully a highly trained barista that is able to execute on the last bits of the coffee preparation process through a super automatic machine, which is, of course, pouring the milk. And that doesn't just relate to the latte art or what picture is on top of the cup. Of course, pouring the coffee allows you to incorporate the right viscosity of foam. It allows you to create the right ratios between your espresso, your milk, and your micro-textured milk. So it's hugely important that we retain that human element in coffee as much as possible, whether you're looking for a traditional machine or whether you're looking for something a little bit more turnkey with something like an Eversys.
I also wanted to just touch on that point. Baristas are the point of contact with the customers at the end of the day. In most coffee shops or cafes, it's not waiters who are serving the coffee. It's generally the customers coming up to the bar and they're asking, what kind of coffee do you have in the hopper today? And Winston, I want to ask you to expand on the barista storytelling aspect that definitely, and the barista interaction that absolutely drives loyalty in a cafe environment.
Yeah, I'd say that the core part of like getting your clients to be loyal in your cafe is the baristas. Yes, the latte art can be nice. Yes, the coffee does need to taste good, but ultimately it does come down to the baristas. I listened to a podcast the other day where they called the barista a happiness manager. Like baristas are there to manage the happiness of your clients. And I found it now in my roastery. We've just opened our first store as well. I started working as a barista in 2014, and I have clients that I served in 2014 coming to drink coffee in my store. Because back then they liked the coffee and they liked the brand, but they also liked the barista. And because of the service I gave them, because I didn't just serve them the coffee and say, have a good day, like I actually engaged, what's the math? 12 years later, I have my old customers coming to drink coffee in my store because of that experience I gave them. So I think it's the most key thing at our company. We hire the people first because we know how much value the people part plays in that loyalty experience. So.
And I think the next thing that's the logical follow-on when it comes to loyalty, and it doesn't matter if you own a guest house or whether you own a top-end hotel, I think the loyalty experience when it comes to coffee, St. John, is absolutely consistency in the beverages that you serve. Am I correct?
Absolutely. I always say to people, I would rather go to a cafe that serves me a consistently good cup of coffee than go to a cafe where one day I'm getting something exceptional and the other day I'm getting something that isn't up to par. And just to add to what Winston said, the barista is the driver of that loyalty into the cafe. You could have the world's most flat commodity coffee, but if the barista greets you warmly with a smile, if they know how to make your day, if they remember your name, remember your coffee order, that's the cafe that I'm going to return to time after time. And hopefully they'll be serving something, beyond commodity coffee. And they're training their baristas well to achieve, perfection in every area, whether that's happiness management, management behind the espresso machine and care for the craft of making coffee itself.
Absolutely, and I want to just touch on roasting and the relationships between roasters and their customers. Winston, you work for Cedar Coffee Roasters, and I think that roasters play a huge role when it comes to especially new food and beverage outlets or operators that are looking to add good quality coffee to their repertoire or their menu or their guest house or the hospitality experience. Tell us a little bit about how that relationship would start and how people could approach a company like Cedar to get going with coffee.
Yeah, I think when we sit down with clients, we first ask what the needs are. I think, of course, your primary need is that you want to serve coffee, but we also want to understand your business so that we can help you, because we don't operate in the transactional sense of you buy the beans from us and you settle and that's it. We like to provide a solution. And so I think what we've managed to do to differentiate ourselves is not just selling the coffee beans, but selling the service. We provide training, we provide consulting, we help set you up for success because your success is our success. And so as a roastery, our primary focus is buying green coffee, roasting the green coffee and selling it. But the service doesn't just end with selling it, because we need to provide some kind of hospitality service to our clients as well, because a lot of the clients approaching us have never done coffee before. And so our brand is also at stake if we're just selling the beans and we're not equipping our clients to serve the coffee in the best way possible.
Absolutely. And St. John, I think, the next part of that is when it comes to equipment, and you can speak to this because this is what you do, and so do you, Winston. And maybe we can just talk about the consistency and how the equipment in the cafes these days helps people, even if they're semi-skilled in coffee and they're still learning along the journey. If they become a new customer to coffee, how does the equipment impact the consistency and therefore the returning loyal customer?
Sure. So, from a Lamazako perspective, we've been implementing technologies and systems into our equipment for the better part of 90 years now to improve the consistency of the product, to improve the consistency of the coffee, but also to make the barista's life slightly easier. One of those innovations all the way back in the 70s was the dual boiler system. Isolating the water for the steam ones and the hot water taps from the water for the group heads, so you could run both at optimal temperatures. I think, we're seeing a huge drive towards telemetry systems in espresso machines, which are able to add another layer of consistency to the coffee making process, and allows you to analyze the data sets that your baristas are working with and how they're hitting the mark on a day-to-day basis, no matter how many cups of coffees that they're actually making. And I think that data can sometimes be overanalyzed, and maybe the devil is in the detail for some people. But for the most part, the more data that you have on hand, the more equipped you are to be able to manage what's happening in your cafe, to isolate problem areas, to be able to say, okay, well, do my baristas need more training? Does my espresso machine require a new solenoid valve, or do we need to perform some preventative maintenance on that equipment to make sure that we're always hitting the mark? And I think it's really, sorry, I've got a bit of an errant microphone here, but I think it's really important that we utilize this data for the benefit of everyone, for the benefit of the consumer, for the benefit of the barista, and ultimately for the benefit of the specialty coffee community as a whole.
And Winston, where do you think that most hospitality businesses go wrong with their coffee, and what are the things that they can do to improve?
I think coffee often seems easier than what it is. It is simpler than what it is, but I think it often seems easier. And I think the biggest mistake is probably trying to do things yourself and not asking for help. And so if you're buying coffee from a certain coffee roaster, just asking them like, okay, where do I start? I think going back to the question you asked earlier, is the reason why we ask our clients all the questions about what are the needs of your business is, if you're starting a business and you're going to have a high volume space and you need to make 300 coffees a day, you can't go on Facebook Marketplace and buy a machine for 20,000 Rand and expect to provide that solution. And I see a lot of people doing that. A Lamazako is the type of machine that's going to help you out. A Eversys is the type of machine that helps you out. And so we try and be very realistic with our customers. And I think a lot of the mistake people make is seeing what other people do and just trying to copy and paste the same thing when your needs are different, when your service needs to be different. you need to find the right solution. And so find a roaster, ask for help, go to a Lamazako, come to an Eversys, ask the questions and have us help you fill the needs of your business, as opposed to just trying to do it yourself, copy and pasting, and trying to find the most cost-effective way to do it.
Absolutely. And St. John, I think, a lot of new operators coming into, especially SMMEs, that coffee or add coffee. Where do you think they should prioritize their spend on a limited budget? Do you think it should be equipment? Do you think it should be training? Do you think it should be coffee beans? Or is it aesthetic? Do you just make a beautiful space that people want to come to? What would you recommend to folks out there?
I mean, in an ideal world, you would have a confluence of all of those factors. I genuinely believe that, as Winston said, it begins with consultation with a professional business that is going to help you out along the way. And 9 times out of 10, that's a coffee roaster. Find a coffee partner that's going to work with you and that's going to help open the doors to fulfill all of those other factors. Of course, we have to be mindful to the fact that equipment like an Eversys, equipment like a Lamazako, these are hugely expensive pieces of equipment that are out of reach of a lot of people in the country. But does that mean that they shouldn't open a cafe? Absolutely not. Eversys and Lamazako and equipment as a whole, you can, with a great bean and with a really well-trained barista, yes, it won't be ideal to operate on a subpar piece of equipment, but it's a great place to get started. I mean, I think Winston can attest to this as well. I know, one of the first machines you worked on was a semi-automatic Nuova Simonelli. The first machine that I worked on was a 20-year-old semi-automatic La Scala. But having access to premium coffee, having access to a rigorous training regimen, or a course that's being run by a professional with years or decades worth of experience, is a great place to begin your coffee journey and to start working towards hitting those other marks, like a dual boiler espresso machine or a grind by weight grinder. Of course, aesthetics and a shop fitting do play a huge part in that. But I mean, as Winston can tell you, having just opened up his first cafe, less is more. You don't have to, reinvent the wheel and create a Starbucks reserve. You can start small and grow consistently, grow sustainably, and achieve a slow growth curve that will ensure consistency and staying power for years to come. And I saw that in my previous business when I was working for Turbidor Coffee Roasters. We never bit off more than we could chew. We never accessed asset finance. As we could afford to upgrade the equipment, as we could afford to import the specialty coffee, that's what we would do. And that creates sustainability in your business. And it's not flash in the pan, invest in millions of rands worth of equipment and, everything else falls by the wayside. It's a slow curve and it should absolutely be treated as such.
Yeah. I think the other thing that I would urge all of you to do is if you are interested in the coffee, in adding coffee to your offering, is become part of the coffee community. I think if you look at, St. John is the vice president of SCASA, the Specialty Coffee Association. And I think Winston's career path has radically been accelerated, the trajectory of it, by winning the South African National Barista Championships 3 times. And I think the coffee community around South Africa is very progressive and it's very inclusive. As much as the businesses compete out there, they are very welcoming, especially to new people who want to learn about coffee and who are interested. And I would urge you, and perhaps you can both speak to this point in our closing remarks here, is to just come in, get involved. There's lots of latte art throwdowns. There's lots of cup tasting competitions. There's lots of community coffee events that happen all around the country. And I think in closing, my final remark would be, if you're interested in coffee, just come and talk to any of us or anybody around the SCASA stage. We're going to be cupping some coffees this afternoon. You're welcome. We've brought some from all over the world to taste. So that would be my closing thought, is if you're interested in coffee, just come and start a conversation with anyone and you'll see their eyes light up, because we love coffee so much and we want you to also love coffee as much as we do. Winston?
Yeah, I agree. I think winning the competition played a big part in the trajectory of my career, but shows like Hostex allows you to engage with the equipment suppliers, the roasters, Skaza itself. And I think I was very good at not just coming to the competition for the competition, but making use of the opportunity I have. When I'm not on stage competing, I'm going to chat to Lamazoko and see what the machines are about. So by the time I was no longer barista and I started my own business, I'd already established these relationships only because a platform like Hostex creates those opportunities. And so I guess I didn't just rest on my laurels and come for the competition, but I made use of the space and I just approached people. I think coffee people are some of the most friendly people you'll find. We're open to conversations. And I think we don't hold anything back. I think we share as much as we can. We're not going to keep anything in the back pocket because we know that if the industry grows, it's good for all of us.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think, if I can just add to that, my career in coffee was also accelerated through the crucible of competition, but in a slightly different way to what Winston's was. I was never the person who was going to be on stage competing as a barista champ. I did it once. I'll never do it again. But, that's not my world. But where my skills do lie, and that's the beauty of the coffee industry, is that there's a space for everyone, right? Whether you're a three-time barista champion or whether you started out like me. I started volunteering for Skaza, 10 years ago. I remember my first volunteering session, you were on the board and I was your photographer for a weekend.
That's right.
And volunteering is something that's so easy and is always available to anyone who's interested in coffee. And as Winston says, we're very open. We love sharing our passions. And I think that's an important point to touch on. This is not just our jobs. We live this. This is our passion. This is what we've chosen to do. And we can't wait to share that with anyone else because we're a lovely community and we're very friendly, we're very open, and all we want to do is share great coffee with you and have a wonderful conversation. And volunteering for Skaza or competing on the stage, that is the best way to get started and push your career from being a barista, as Winston and I both once were, to taking your career to the next level, and whether that being opening your own cafe or working for your dream espresso machine brand, anything is within reach should you choose to be a part of it.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you. That's all we have time for. I'd like you to give a big round of applause to our guest speakers, Mr. St. John Wicks and Mr. Winston Thomas. And thank you for your attention and for listening to us. And I urge you this afternoon, if you're around at about 2 o'clock this afternoon, just behind us on the Skaza stage, we're going to be tasting lots of delicious coffees, and you're more than welcome to join us, and we'd love to see you all there. Thank you so much.